Okay, thanks for that very kind introduction. Sorry that I never got to take your class. But I'm back now, so it still happens. I'd also like to thank the French department, the Roadshow Center, International Program, and my department, the writing program. It's an honor to be back in Middlebury. It's an honor to have my book launch here, especially as this book is about my semester studying abroad in Middlebury, Paris. As many of you know, this day term I'm teaching a creative writing course called Healing Through Writing. You may wonder how someone who focuses on the genres of writing field, narrative medicine, came to write a travel memoir. On the flip side, you could also ask how the author of travel memoir, who previously worked for Immersion Travel magazine, Transitions Abroad, and Abroad View, came to teach healing through writing. Well, that's an interesting. At the time I was frolicking around Paris, my body had been harboring, unbeknownst to me, serious cases of Lyme disease and other tick-borne infections for almost 2 years. It would be another 6 years before I got accurately diagnosed. By that time, the infections had spread all over my body, crossed the blood-brain barrier, left me bedridden, hooked up to an IV. There wasn't much joy in those dark, desolate days. At age 25, I had to give up my job teaching, my life skiing in the Rocky Mountains, and my independence, to move back to my. I couldn't do much, but I could write. Even on the worst days, when I was too exhausted to walk downstairs for breakfast, I could still put pen to paper from the confines of my bed. I could write a sentence or two, be a full paragraph, sometimes only a few words. But I was doing something. It felt good. In my class, we talked about the necessity of writing from a safe. In the throes of illness, I was too close to the situation to write about Lyme disease. I needed an escape to a happier time, to a time that was filled with liveliness, adventure, the zest for discovery. And so I began to record scenes from my days studying in Paris. I couldn't physically leave my bed, but writing allowed me to mentally and emotionally escape to the city of light, a place that had hosted my journey from foreigner to Francophile, and left me a more worldly, more confident person for it. Et voila, the book was born. Flash forward a decade, and I am now in remission, able to write reflectively about my illnesses. Able to return to Middlebury, a place that always filled me with energy and hope and wonder. And this time I have the opportunity to learn with and from my students. And I am able at long last to pick up this book in published form and read a chapter of it aloud. So the chapter I'm going to read is chapter 8. At this point in the book, I had been in Paris for about a month, but had yet to meet my propriétaire, my landlady, because she had been traveling when I arrived. And I was living in a tiny studio in what was the old maid's quarter for her lavish apartment. I finally meet my propriétaire, Madame Boudreau, in Groundhog Day. Except there aren't any groundhogs. So February 2nd is instead marked by a national celebration. Prepperies throughout Paris offer free samples. The buzz is similar to that of Free Cone Day in American history. I try to explain the tradition of Punxsutawney Phil, shadow to Madame, but the best translation I can come up with for groundhog is little dog that lives underground. Madame looks at me the way one might look at a child who has just announced that Superman is coming to dinner. Madame has invited me to dinner at her apartment. The call is for 7:30. At 7:28, I run a final brush through my hair, rearrange the flowers and rings, and descend the creaky stairwell that ends in front of Madame's door. It takes several rings of the bell for the door to be flung open by a plump, gray-haired woman wearing a fuzzy blue bathrobe and pink curlers. Pardon, I stammer in embarrassment. Do I have the wrong time? Madame ceremoniously flaps her right bathrobe sleeve and looks at her watch. 7:30, she pronounces. Oui, vous avez dit 7:30, non? I want to fall to the floor or run back up the stairs. Oui, 7:30. There's a matter of fact. Pregnant. I wonder what I'm missing here. It's common knowledge among the French that it doesn't really start until at least half an hour past the time. So if any less than 15 minutes late, it's a faux pas. I tell Madame that I'll come back later, tripping over myself with apologies and offering her the flowers I supplicate. Ça va, ça va. In a rush of curlers and cold cream, she offers me the traditional kisses, opens the door all the way, revealing an exquisite apartment that takes up the entire floor of the building. Entree! I walk in sheepishly, feeling like the proverbial elephant in the room. Madame takes the flowers, exclaiming that pink matches her decor, and how did I know tulips were her favorite? She motions for me to sit in the living room. Couches are deep blue, so plush and full of pillows that I'm afraid to sit down. Mahogany bookcases frame the room, and everything, from the curtains to the coffee table, seems to be gilded in gold. "C'est magnifique," I tell Madame as I perch gingerly on the edge of the low seat. She waves off my compliment and asks what I'd like to drink. Before I can answer, she says, "We will have port." Port? I've never had this thick, dark wine, but I know it is strong. I thought it was an after-dinner drink. Apparently, I'm wrong about the latter, but dead on about the former. I almost choked on my first sip. Madame tells me to drink up while she just finishes getting ready. She leaves me alone with my glass of cough syrup on the fancy couch, singing to herself as she toddles off to her bedroom. I stare at the glass, not sure what to do. Finally, I force myself to drink a few drops. "You don't like it?" Madame asks when she reappears in the librarian's sweater set. She peers into my glass with alarm. "Oh, c'est delicieux," I lie. Madame nods, pours herself a healthy glass, and drinks half of it in one gulp. Looks over at me expectantly. Not wanting to make another social gap, decides the only thing to do is to follow suit. The alcohol stings my throat and settles in my chest like a blob of mucus. Within minutes, I can feel my cheeks flush and relax back against the velvet. Madame is gregarious and warm, asking me lots of questions about life in America and how I'm faring in France. The one good thing about the sport is that it seems to have improved my French skills. With my inhibitions down, I speak quickly and accurately, thinking more in French than in English. A grandfather clock in the hallway chimes 8 o'clock, and I am literally saved by the bell. As if on cue, Madame's daughter Pauline, her son Philippe, burst through the door in time with the second chime. "Bonsoir, they cry, kissing Madame on both cheeks. Pauline turns and does the same to me, as if I am part of the family. 4-year-old Philippe stares at me wide-eyed from behind his mother's legs. I squat down to his level. "Bonsoir." Philippe continues to look at me as if I've landed from another planet. "Ça va? Comment tu t'appelles?" Philippe looks up at his mother in confusion. "Ça va? Comment tu t'appelles?" I think the rendition sounds exactly the same as mine, but to Philippe, it actually sounds like French. His face lights up with understanding, and he starts babbling away to me. "Bon, shall we eat?" Madame ushers us into the dining room, where a beautiful mahogany table is set with ivory china and matching candles. She opens a bottle of red wine and pours all 4 of us equal amounts. I can't help but stare in surprise at little glass, waiting for one of the adults to say, "Good Lord, what have we done? Someone go get this child some grape juice." But no one says a word. We begin with baguette, followed by a delicious entree of roasted eggplant covered in goat cheese. Eat slowly, relishing every bite, and Madame waits several minutes after we've finished before clearing the plate. I'm stuffed to the brim, and am alarmed when Madame returns from the kitchen with a heaping plate of crepes, piled high like pancakes. I should have known something was up. After all, it is crepe. I soon find out that entree means appetizer. The eggplant was simply meant to wet my palate. Some of the crepes are filled with egg, some with ham, some with cheese. When we're stuffed absolutely silly on those, we move on to crepes pie, filled with everything from Nutella to blueberry jam. Each staff is served with yet another glass of wine. Philippe, to my relief, gets cut off after 2. But Madame and Pauline continue to drink as if they have a tip on a drought. Again, I follow suit. Before long, the room starts. My voice is growing louder and giddier. I'm having a hard time aiming my fork at my mouth. Just as I'm about to rest my head on my plate, Madame clears the table and motions for Pauline to refill our glasses once more. Cover mine with my right palm. "Non, merci." Pauline shrugs as if to say, "You're lost," and moves on to her mother's glass. Neither woman seems the slightest bit intoxicated, and Philippe doesn't seem the slightest bit tired, even though a stealthy glance at my watch tells me it's 10 o'clock. I'm sure the night must be drawing to a close. I can just make it up the stairs and into my bed. How wrong I am. Madame suddenly appears from the kitchen carrying a large bowl of salad and 4 plates. Now I know I am drunk. Didn't we already have the first course? In fact, didn't we just eat dinner? We had. And now we were going to follow up with salad, as all good Frenchmen do. The lettuce tastes bitter to me after the sweet crust, but I'm happy to keep filling my stomach with anything other than alcohol. Between bites, sips, and cigarettes, Madame and Pauline continued to ask me questions about America. Do you know Bill Clinton? Have you been to Hollywood? My French flows like the wine, and it's a good half hour before the conversation dwindles as Philippe stifles the yawn. I'm right there with him, ready to thank Madame for a lovely evening and head upstairs. But alas, salad must be followed by fromage. Madame pulls a large plastic container out of the refrigerator, filled with bits and pieces of every kind of cheese imaginable. Some are hard, soft, white, blue, some would smell so overwhelming that it's an effort not to wrinkle my nose. More baguette is passed around. Madame encourages me several plates. I can't imagine consuming any more dairy after all those cheese preps, but I don't want to be rude. I did my butter knife. Finally, when I've convinced Madame and Pauline that I am not friends with Lewinsky and have never met Brad Pitt, Madame breaks out a box of truffles. I know we really are on the last course. Nothing can possibly follow dessert. Have you been to the Arc de Triomphe? Madame asks as Carmel dribbles down her chin. I wonder if she means literally or metaphorically. Have I been to the monument, or have I finally triumphed over this meal? Either way, the answer is yes. And have you walked down the Champs-Élysées? I nod, proud to be able to say I've seen some of the more famous sights of the city. At night? I shake my head. Quelle horreur! Madame's eyes go round and she shoots Pauline a disturbed glance. You must walk down it at night. How have you not done this yet? My pride pops like a balloon. I shrug my shoulders, smiling sheepishly. Well then, we will go tonight, Madame says with a decisive nod. She stands and heads to the front hall closet for her coat. I steal another glance at my watch, but it's nearly 11 o'clock. Phone, Madame calls from the hallway. It is still early. The Metrics do not close until almost 1 a.m. Run upstairs and get your coat. I'd rather run upstairs and collapse into my bed, but I get the sense that won't be an option. When I return with my peacoat and Metro card, I find Philippe throwing a fit on the floor. I want to go with them, he cries, pounding his fist against the hardwood tiles. Pauline sighs with exasperation as she tries, rather unsuccessfully, to pull her son to his feet. It's very late, Philippe. You need to go to bed. It is not late, Philippe hollers. He said so. She points to his grandmother. Philippe scolds Pauline. Don't point. Philippe scolds Pauline. Don't point. She looks at me apologetically and turns back to her son. We have a big day tomorrow. You need to rest up. Where are you going tomorrow? I break in, hoping to help calm Philippe. On va chez McDo, he exclaims with a huge grin, suddenly forgetting his tears. It is impossible for me to believe that with such decadent meals at their disposal, French children still equate a trip to McDonald's with a trip to the carnival. But it's true, the lines at the McDo on our street are always out the door. I don't know what to say. Bon, on y va, Madame breaks the awkward silence. She shoos me out the door, leaving Pauline to deal with Philippe and to lock up. The Champs-Élysées by night is just as beautiful as Madame described, and well worth the missed wings. The long, wide boulevard is lined with trees covered in tiny white lights, all leading up to a glowing Arc de Triomphe. Arm in arm, Madame and I amble towards it, taking in the night and celebrating this holiday right up until the last possible minute. Thank you so much. I'd love to welcome questions. Any questions you might have about the book, about my experience in Paris, about the writing process, anything you'd like to ask.
You can begin with a student.
French already when you came here, or did you begin here and did you know that you wanted to speak French when you came?
A good question. I started taking French in 7th grade, and knew from that point that I'd always wanted to go to France. And then I continued studying it when I was here. But certainly came in. One of the reasons I came to Middlebury was knowing how strong the language programs were and knowing that there were such was one of the study abroad programs, and then I wanted to go to France. Emily.
What What do you think your relationship with Madame would have been if you hadn't obliged to all of her invitations?
That's a great question. um, yeah, I mean, since I was living in a little studio that she owned, I certainly wanted to write by her. But I think, I'm glad in the end that I did oblige. It allowed me to really get a glimpse into French culture in a way that I probably otherwise wouldn't have. I'm certainly glad that I went to go to the Champs-Élysées with her that night and get to see it that way. Yeah, I think it forged a good relationship for us. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about travel writing and some of the challenges you found as you did it? What did you try to avoid? What did you find yourself embracing?
So the biggest thing for me, I think, was just trying to avoid cliche. There are so many books written about Paris. And for me, I wanted to make it a different experience. I really wanted to write about the student experience. I've found lots of memoirs out there about people living in Paris, expats in Paris, working in Paris, or traveling in Paris, but none specifically for the student experience. And I think that's such a finite, special experience where you're so immersed in the culture, yet you know you have to leave. And so I really wanted to try to capture that, and so that's something I tried to stick with. Another thing which I learned in your class, Professor Cohen, about writing about place. The first time I ever wrote about Paris was in Professor Cohen's class after I'd come back from Paris. And a very important lesson you taught me was, why does this story specifically have to be in Paris? Could it have taken place in New York? Could it have taken place in Chicago? And that was a great thing for me to think about as I wrote the whole book, is how do I make this very specific to Paris? How do I make this very specific to the experience that I had, and make it specific to the place that I was? And ultimately, I really think this book turned out to be a book about place. A lot of people have written about falling in love with Paris, in Paris. And for me, it was about falling in love with Paris. There's certainly the regular thread of romance in the book that you might expect, but in the end, it's about falling in love with the city. And certainly I got the start of that from your class, so thank you for that.
I can. Although my voice is loud enough. You went to Paris, I assume, after. It was not the only time in Paris, right?
It was not the only, yeah.
So when you were writing, or when you were making the final touches on the book, when you were already healthy, did the later experience mark your previous experience, or did they heighten them in any way, or less? Or in other words, when I'm thinking about this one in writing, when you keep on going back to a place where you had these incredible experiences early on, your new experience colors some of your old experience. So I want to know, in terms of the writing, how did you negotiate these two experiences, or 3 or 4 or 10 experiences?
Yeah,
How many times?
That's a great question. And in fact, I was only able to go back one more time because of my health. And so it has been many years since I've been able to travel there. But I would have been back since the experience of studying abroad there. And I really have tried to not think about that experience at all when writing the book, so that it wouldn't color it. At the time I was studying in Paris, I kept a very meticulous journal, which my friends kind of made fun of me for, and I said, one day you'll thank me for it, and now we have it in the book. But I tried to really, read through that journal and stick to that, and really try to stick to who I was at the time, so that the voice of the narrator would stay this 21-year-old woman, young student, and not the voice of an adult going back. But that's certainly something I had to be very conscious of at every point. Yeah.
So I guess a related question to that. So there are certain features of it that feel very eternal. That experience of having people ply you with drinks that you really don't want is something that happened to me in November. and so that those are things that keep happening, but then I'm guessing there are also things like when we got to study abroad, we were some of the last ones to do it without things like internet and cell phones.
Yes.
And so in writing this at this point, were there certain details maybe that you included that, or maybe you positioned in such a way to sort of, you're trying to keep this voice of this narrator that is the student who's discovering Paris at this particular time period, but then there is sort of this, looking back at this as an adult now, as an adult and looking and being like, oh, well, that's funny. I had to go call my mom from, you had to go and hunt down some sort of phone you could
Right.
use, right?
Right. So that's an excellent question. So at the time I was in Paris, it was spring of 1999. So right on the brink of the new millennium, and that's something I talk about in the book. Sort of how I was on the brink of, childhood and adulthood, and Paris and Europe and the world were on the brink of coming into the new millennium. But certainly there are things that happen in the book that wouldn't happen today, because, for example, we had, very slow internet. There were no cell phones. Parisians had cell phones, but the Americans did not yet have them. Certainly did not have internet at home. Had internet only at school, which worked sometimes, and computers that worked sometimes. So a lot of the drama that happens surrounding that. There was one scene in the book where a friend of mine calls me and leaves me a voicemail that he's not feeling well because of some medicine that he took, and could I come to the hospital with him? By the time I get to the voicemail, it's a couple of hours later, and I call him back, and there's no answer. He doesn't have an answering machine, and there's no cell phones, and I have no idea where he is. Now, in today's world, that drama wouldn't have even unfolded that way, because we'd have cell phones to get in touch, and what I wound up doing was running 16 blocks to school in the rain to find our other friend, and, to say, what should we do, and eventually we got a hold of him. He was okay. As it turns out, he went to get something to eat. That's why he was out. The medicine was making him hungry. But so there was drama in that wouldn't have unfolded today. But I'm so grateful for that. So much of that was my experience. And even my sister went abroad to London. She's 10 years younger than I am. And when she was there, she Skyped with my parents once a week, and I didn't have anything like that, and I'm so glad for it. It really made for it, my own experience. I had to get through things with the people I was with and figure things out, and I couldn't just run down the street, and I couldn't even find a telecart to make a call on the payphone the first day, so I couldn't even do that. And so, it really adds to these adventures that were difficult at the time, but really shaped the experience in the end. And so I'm very grateful for that. That's not to say that students going abroad today wouldn't have a wonderful experience and good experience. Of course, there are, similar things that will shape them, and that's great. But there are those differences, especially with technology. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, Katie.
In terms of the writing process, and you said you're writing while you're affected by this illness as sort of an escape. When you started writing, did you know you wanted to write about your time in Paris, or did it take you a while to sort of find that as your escape? And I guess, why did you ultimately come to write about that experience?
That's another great question. So one thing that I say really saved my life when I was so sick was email. From the age of email, before Skype and before texting, and I would email my friends, and that was my escape from my bed, to stay in contact with people. And I've stayed very close friends with the people I was in Paris with, and, so they would email me, and I started just emailing them stories, remembering stories of things we had done, because it would make me laugh. And they would write me stories back, and that would make me laugh, and so that was a part of healing. And suddenly I realized, well, maybe I could really write about these, not just as emails, but, so I started putting down anecdotes, separately, not really thinking, how will this come together as a book? But then, slowly as that developed, I realized, wait a minute, there are some threads here, and I could write the whole book, I could write the whole experience, and it wasn't until several drafts later that I realized, this is a story about falling in love with a place, and, all that developed over time. But at that time, it really just started with emailing with my friends, sharing some funny memories, and then realizing, this is going to turn into a book. Yeah. Emily.
When you started, when you officially started
started writing your book and when you were still in the throes of your illness, did you find it to be ultimately healing to write about Paris, or was there an element of frustration comparing where you were in Paris and what you wanted to do, and where you were then that complete the goals that you had set for yourself?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think mostly there was healing and there was relief in escaping to that time and kind of keeping it separate. But certainly there were times when it was frustrating writing about skiing in the Alps, and actually I had altitude sickness while I was there, and it was because I had this underlying case of Lyme that I didn't know about. So, looking back, I see how it actually affected my time in Paris, and actually it kind of made me feel pretty amazed that I was able to do as much as I was, knowing later just how sick I was. I think mostly it made me grateful. I try not to compare experiences as much as possible in terms of what I can do now and what I can do then, because it would just make me so frustrated, and I have to just be grateful for what I can do now, which is, a very different life from the life I led then, but it's a new normal, and I'm here, so I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
A little bit about what your J-term class is.
Sure. Yeah, so my different class is called Healing Through Writing, and some of the students are here, which we're so grateful for. What we do is we basically look at how personal narrative helps people to work through personal adversity, and work through trauma and come to a healing point, and how the writing itself is healing, is a form of healing. And so we look at different writings about all different forms of trauma, and then write our own personal narratives. And students are writing 3 personal narratives and poetry about their own time. Not to put them on the spot, but I think it's working pretty well. I think, yeah. We've really been enjoying it. So I'll be very sad to leave in a couple of weeks. So. Yeah.
Are you using certain published works as well?
Yes, we are. We're looking at a lot of published works that I looked at either at my time in Middlebury or in my time at grad school or in my time being sick. That really helped me. We're reading Brain on Fire by Susanna Callahan, her Month of Madness, which is great, and brain infection that she had. We do All But My Life by Gerda Weissman Klein, Holocaust survivor. Help me out. What else have we? We've done some war poetry, Colin Halloran's war poetry. What did I say? The Telling, a memoir of rape and recovery, Patricia Weaver Francisco. Half the House, thank you. You're filling in my line brain here. Half the House, Richard Hoffman, A Tale of Sexual Abuse. So we try to look at lots of different types of trauma and how writing has helped these authors to heal, and also different types of narratives, be it poetry, essay, longer book. Today we looked at different types of prologues. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at epilogues and how those are shaped differently, and how those have helped the writer through the process.
There is, in today's New York Times, there is an article called Writing Your Way to Happiness.
I saw that. Yes, I did see it. Yeah.
Which is really interesting, and all of us should look at it. And it's about actually students, and when they have difficulties in school, and how writing helps them stay in school and focus. It's a very interesting research. That it's a report of a research, very interesting. So there are really many different reasons to write, right?
Yeah.
Not just for what
Not
I
just
write.
money.
Not just money.
No, it's so true. There actually have been studies done by James Pennebaker that show that for people who have been through trauma and then write about it, the brain actually neurologically goes back to the state that it was in pre-trauma after writing. Yeah. So you can scientifically see that change. Yeah. Which is really pretty amazing. Yeah. That's what I think.
So, going back to the question you asked about sort of the difference in the way people go abroad now compared to how they did 15 years ago or 16 years ago when you did, and I read the very beginning of the book as well and your initial experience there, and it made me think, okay, it's almost, so your story is almost kind of a relic of the past, of what study abroad was like then. But because it's sort of also this voyage of discovery and learning, I was thinking to myself, should students read this before they go abroad to sort of have a sense? And I just wonder what you think, if they should, or because you wouldn't necessarily want them to have the same discovery experience you did.
Right.
But there might be a way in which this could open up ways of experiencing for them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
That's a great question. I mean, I think it's the type of book that could be read before or afterwards. Afterwards, it might be nice to just kind of go back to someone who's had that common experience. But before, my hope is that it would give inspiration to students and see, everyone's got struggles when you first get over there. Yours will be different, but you can get through them. There's real joy in getting through them. There's triumph in that. And just kind of instilling that same sense of discovery, that same sense of adventure, that same sense of, what can this experience bring to me? What can this do for me? Which I think is timeless.
Well, Jennifer will be available to sign books back there, but I want to thank you very much. This is really, really interesting.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.